1 year ago, on December 6th, Israel murdered Refaat Alareer, the beloved professor, poet, and mentor who helped sharpen countless young minds and who inspires people all over the world. Refaat was a contributor to the electronic Intifada. He was, in fact, the first guest we ever had on the first episode of this live stream on October 9th of last year. He was also a dear friend to many of us. We miss Refaat greatly, but he has not been silenced. His new book, If I Must Die, a collection of poetry and prose, has just been published by OR Books, and it immediately became a bestseller, #1 in books on Middle Eastern literature, and it was in the top 100 overall on a very well-known online retailer whose name I won't mention. Susan Abulhawa wrote the foreword, and If I Must Die was edited by Yousef Aljamal, Refaat's former student, colleague, and close friend. A prolific writer and analyst, Yousef is the Gaza Coordinator at the American Friends Service Committee's Palestine Activism program. And just out too is the memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back, the powerful volume of short stories by young Gaza writers, edited by Refaat and first published in 2014. I had the honor of writing the foreword for the new memorial edition, and the book also has updates from many of the writers who contributed. It is published by Helena Cobban's imprint, Just World Books, a writer with decades of experience and knowledge about the region. Helena directs Just World Educational, and we're delighted to have both Yousef and Helena join us now. It's really so good to see both of you.
Yeah, welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be with all three of you on the screen, especially Yousef, because we launched the book with a lovely event last Friday, and Yousef couldn't be with us in person, so we had a kind of pre-recorded Yousef, and now we have a live Yousef.
We'll take Yousef in any way we can get him, but the best way is live. And so Yousef, let's start with you. You just returned from Malaysia, where you and Refaat studied and lived for several years. What was it like visiting some of the places where you spent time with Refaat, and what were people in Malaysia who knew Refaat? What were they saying to you?
So I visit Malaysia every year. I attend the annual conference on Palestine Studies at the Hashim Sani Center for Palestine Studies at University Malaya. And last year, I remember I texted Refaat everywhere I went to. I told him, "Oh, I am at this station. Oh, I am with this friend. I'm visiting this place." And Refaat was like reacting from Gaza as much as he could during the genocide. We also spoke about the loss of our mutual friend, Dr. Raed Qaddura. And Refaat told me that he was shocked to hear that Raed was killed along with his family, 55 members of his family in Jabalia. But this year, Refaat was not there to text, but I saw Refaat everywhere I went to. I saw Refaat at University Malaya because we went there multiple times. We have photos at the bus stop. One time, Refaat posed in front of the Faculty of Arts, and he asked me to take a photo of him as if he was not paying attention to the camera. So that's Refaat. Sometimes he would be acting silly, and we loved that about Refaat. And I still have these photos and shared them with people at the conference. So this year it felt very emotional to even cross by the residential complex where he lived in an area called Serdang outside Kuala Lumpur. So it felt very emotional. I saw Refaat in many different places, many different faces. People were asking about his family. And I also was able to go to UPM, University Putra Malaysia, where I met with his former supervisor, Dr. Norita Omar, who's working on republishing the memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back, as well as Refaat's PhD dissertation on John Donne as a revolutionary poet. So this also made me feel somehow satisfied that his legacy, his life, his writings live on and are preserved. We also had discussions of starting a scholarship that carry his name, a memorial lecture. So there are many projects underway. I was also able to visit the office where Refaat sat and wrote his PhD. So many mixed feelings. I felt very happy to be there, but also I felt sad, and I saw Refaat everywhere.
Yeah.
And I know we have quite a few viewers who are saying hello from Malaysia in the chat, and we're very happy to see you there. And I visited Malaysia a few years ago. I think Refaat had already left, but I met Dr. Raed Qaddura there, who had also contributed to the electronic Intifada before he was martyred. And so it's good to know that Refaat left an impression and a mark in Malaysia, where he had many friends as well. Yousef, it's been a year since Refaat's murder, and there have been so many ways that his work and his words and his voice have traveled across the world. And one of those ways has been this new book of Refaat's writing. I've got my copy here, which I'm very, very pleased to have with me. Which of course you edited, If I Must Die, Poetry and Prose. Tell us about what it means to you and what it means for Refaat's work.
It's the honor of my life that I got to meet Refaat and be his student and be his friend. And it felt a huge responsibility to, like put his writings, his poetry, his prose between two covers and publish them in a book that preserve his legacy so that people could access his writings. And as I worked on the texts and the quotes and the many articles and journal articles and poems he wrote, I realized how Refaat was always ahead of his time. He was visionary in many different ways. He would see things that we wouldn't see. So it's a great responsibility. It's an emotional experience to work on these texts and to edit a book about him that includes his writings. I felt a huge responsibility, and it's just the least I could do as one student of thousands of students he trained, to tell his story. This is what he wanted. If I Must Die is after his poem that went viral, that was translated into 250 languages. And in this poem, Refaat wanted us to tell his story, not because he wanted to die, but because we have an occupier that kills Palestinians, Palestinian intellectuals like Refaat. And he wanted his death to bring about hope. And now, this is exactly what's happening with this book, with the many projects that carry his name and preserve his legacy. With the memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back, with Refaat Writes Back, that is being supervised by his former student Rawan Yaghi. Refaat's writings and legacy and name is traveling across the globe, just like his kites did when he was a teenager in Shuja'iyya. And of course, in his poem, he spoke about kites. That's Refaat himself flying kites in Shuja'iyya. And now we have the book. As you said, it's a bestseller. And I know that thousands of people are interested in getting a copy. Royalties from the book go to his surviving family. So this is a way to support his surviving family, who now live in Gaza City after Shayma, Refaat's eldest daughter, was killed by Israel. So all these projects aim to or at preserving his legacy, and almost every day, and Helena also collaborate with me on this, we get requests from people asking to use his poem, his writings, in like turning them into drama, music, lyrics, some PhD students, master students, asking to use Refaat's poem "If I Must Die" in their works, and I think this is the most honorable way to die, to be remembered, and Refaat is remembered now, and really, like, as you flip the photos, this photo was taken in California. I remember Noura is in California now, as well as Helena. I remember many stories with Refaat there, and it just feels very emotional to do this work, and I think it's the honor of my life, I would say, to edit this book.
And congratulations on it being a bestseller, and that's just a wonderful thing. And I loved seeing those photos with Refaat with his EI, Electronic Intifada sticker, which is a great honor for us. It's also an honor for us that a number of the pieces that Refaat wrote that are in If I Must Die, some of them were published by the Electronic Intifada, and so it's really, really a special thing for us too. Noura.
Yeah, and people in the comments have been asking where to get that book, and again, it's published by OR Books. It's very easy to find online, but there's another book as well. Helena, tell us about the memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back and how Refaat students and colleagues have contributed to it. At least those that you could contact during this genocide. I know that you tried to get in touch with everyone who contributed in 2014 to that edition. What was it like putting this memorial edition out?
Well, yes, thank you, Nora. It's great to be with all of you. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be on the live stream. So Gaza Writes Back, the initial edition obviously came out in 2014, and that's when Just World Books and the American Friends Service Committee brought Refaat and Yousef and Rowan, thank you, Yousef, Rowan Yeri here to the United States, and we toured them all around the country. We had wanted to bring Sarah Ali, but the Israelis would not let her out of Gaza. So we actually carried around a sort of a placard, a blank placard with a profile of a kind of generic woman, and said Sarah Ali should be here. And that kind of was the point of that, was to underline the horrible effect that Israel's continuing occupation has, just blocking people's travel and wrecking their ability to connect with intellectuals worldwide. So obviously I followed Refaat's appearances on this live stream back in October and November of last year. And, people should go back and see them because they are very, very moving, including the one where he just really can't help but cry as the bombs are exploding in the background. And the one where he talks about picking up his expo marker and throwing it. He said that's the most violent thing I could be. That's like the only thing I could do to defend myself. Of course, the expo marker was no use for him on December 6th of last year, when the Israelis used, I don't know, a Hellfire missile or probably something, created here in the United States, paid for with our tax dollars and sent by our government to kill him, based on presumably artificial intelligence developed here in Silicon Valley, paid for by the Israelis, paid for by my tax dollars. They were tracking him clearly before he died. So obviously, I've been really blessed to be able to work with Yousef a lot in recent months. We have a weekly podcast called the Palcast that we put out, that I urge people to look for on Apple and Spotify. And I worked closely with Yousef on how to protect and extend Refaat's legacy. So the important thing here is to note that his legacy needed to be defended, because toward the end of his life and for many years prior, he was subjected to terrible defamation and attacks from Zionists here in this country, including the terrible Barry Weiss, who completely misunderstood a tweet of his that was, you know, really an example of his black sardonic humor. I guess Barry Weiss, who is this influential Zionist commentator in this country, doesn't have any concept of, you know, sardonic or, you know, black humor or humor at all, maybe. But so she kind of singled him out, and then very shortly thereafter he was killed. But in the interim, he had 3 essays commissioned by Prospect magazine in London, and when Barry Weiss and that whole, you know, defamation came up, Prospect magazine said, oh, we're going to pull those essays, we're not going to publish them. And actually, I think they had a little bit of, I don't know, after he was killed, maybe they felt guilty. So they sent back the copies of those essays, which were lovely essays. And Yousef, who is handling Refaat's literary legacy on behalf of the family, arranged for Ali to publish them on electronic Intifada. So they did see the light of day, but it's important to note those attempts that were made to suppress him, his works, his words, his power and his legacy. So that's why it's really important that we have taken this opportunity to extend his legacy by putting out the new edition of Gaza Writes Back. It contains everything that was in the first edition, including an intriguingly composed poem. If you look at
To Palestine, to Gaza is the title. I'm just saying that for those who are listening.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Ali. You're so good at doing that. And the shape of it.
The shape of the poem, yeah.
Is the shape of a bomb. So, yeah. But we invited this guy called Ali Abunimah to contribute the foreword, and it is such a lovely piece of writing. I don't know, I get emotional whenever I think about this whole project. But
and if I can say, I do too, by the way, Helena, and if I can say, it was really an honor for me to be asked to write a foreword, and it was a daunting. It was an opportunity. I think I finished writing it in June, probably a day before the very extended deadline, and that's not because I was procrastinating, but because it was so difficult to sit down and confront the loss of Refaat, but what was amazing to me, my starting point was to read Gaza Writes Back, a book which I'd read when it came out, but so much has happened in that decade. The first thing I did was I sat down and I reread it, and what struck me was how fresh and how prescient and how powerful it is. There is nothing dated about this book. It was published in 2014 in the wake of the 2008-2009 massacre, war on Gaza, and just before the 2014 war. And there is this 25-page introduction by Refaat in which he sort of lays out his vision and his philosophy. And you realize it's exactly what Yousef said. Refaat saw things before a lot of us did. And so this book, which, the memorial edition, is really incredibly relevant now. And what I'm saying is that it's fantastic that If I Must Die is a bestseller, but we need to make this a bestseller too. Refaat should have 2 bestsellers at least.
Right.
Yeah, I just also want to come in with the difference between the 2 books, because they in a sense they highlight 2 different parts of Refaat's legacy. The Refaat's own book, If I Must Die, is his own writings. In many genres, some of his poems, some better known, some less well known, and there's a beautiful editor's introduction by Yousef, but the main, and then the foreword by Susan Abulhawa, but the main content of it is Refaat's own writings, prose, literary criticism, poetry, commentary, like just a really rich collection of everything that he wrote. Whereas the other one really plays to his legacy as a mentor and teacher, because it contains 23 short stories, of which of which he contributed 3. And we did have this, so the subtitle of the book is Short Stories from Young Writers in Gaza, Palestine. And we always had this discussion. So Refaat, what constitutes a young writer? So he had contributed 3 of the stories himself, and he would always say, my age and younger is a young writer. So, you know, I think that's great. And I think I should maybe adopt that, say,
Yes.
age 72, I should say 72 and younger is definitely a young writer.
Yeah.
But
Still a youth. Yeah.
But you know, you can tell the love with which he worked with these students, mentees, and colleagues, who did include back in the day Yousef Aljamal, who is now, you know, has emerged as a leading intellectual in your own right, Yousef, and Dr. Mohammed Suleiman in Australia, and like the students and mentees of Refaat are a huge part of his legacy.
Abu Bakr is one of his students.
Yeah, that's right.
Abu Bakr is one of his students. And many EI writers are his students.
And I think one of the important things he underlined, and maybe Yousef, you could say more about this, is the fact that he wanted to, you know, get people to connect with English language, literature and commentary, and the whole kind of global Anglosphere, which obviously extends to Malaysia and, you know, lots of other places too. But he wanted them to do that in order to gain, you know, knowledge and expertise, but to take that back to Gaza. So I see, like, as a wonderful project, once the occupation of Gaza is ended, that all those people from all around the world who you know have all those skills will do what Dr. Refaat did, which was to go back to Gaza to help build it / rebuild it. But Yousef, you're like much more important in this project than I am. So what can you add?
Refaat always asked his students and people he knew to go back to Gaza after they finish. I remember Asim al-Nabi had this conversation with him, and every time Asim said that he might be looking for opportunities outside Gaza to do this and that, Refaat would remind him that, but you still could go back to Gaza and do the same thing. So Refaat wanted people to go back to Gaza. He felt very proud to be from Shuja'iyya, from Gaza. He would remind everybody he met that he's from Shuja'iyya. And I think the fact that he stayed in the northern part of Gaza when he had the option to move south to tell the stories of people there speaks volumes of his love for Gaza, and his commitment to tell its story. And that's why he's known as the storyteller of Gaza, the voice of Gaza. There is no question about it. And I think it's important that his students carry on this legacy to go back to Gaza and rebuild Gaza in a decolonial way, as Refaat envisioned Gaza to be always in the past, in the future. So it's important that we go back, we contribute to rebuilding Gaza, rebuilding the education system in Gaza, so that it continues to produce people like Refaat, who emerged to be a global intellectual and figure out of Gaza, despite the siege, despite being sent back at the crossing, not allowed to leave. He tried many times until he made it out of Gaza. He lost scholarships. He applied for other scholarships. He never gave up. And he always bullied his students to apply for scholarships and to leave Gaza and get the education they needed and to go back to Gaza. He always spoke of the intellectual siege imposed on Palestinians by Israel. So I think it's important that we continue this thinking and this legacy, and Rifat's approach of spreading the word about Gaza, but also encouraging people to be in Gaza and to go back to Gaza.
Yeah. Um,
Nora,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, do you want to play the audio?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was a good segue. So,
Yeah.
we do have a short, like 2-minute audio clip from an interview that I did in 2014 with you, Yousef, and Rawan Yagi and Refaat in person when you came to visit the San Francisco Bay Area as part of the book tour with Helena and Ali. This is from a longer interview that I did, and it's one of about 4 that I've done with Refaat since 2014 for the podcast before the genocide. And I'm working on putting together kind of like an audio tapestry program of these 4 interviews, and I'm hoping it'll be out next week. But here's a clip of Refaat speaking to us in 2014 about Gaza Writes Back and the beauty of this project.
Creative writing, I always believed that, I still do actually, that there's always a writer inside every one of us. All you need to do is do some poking. And that writing is an act of courage. You have to be courageous in order to believe that you can write. For these young Palestinians, they had the very good command of English and the understanding of the importance of their role as young Palestinians who have to do something for the struggle against oppression and racism. So every time we had, for example, a course on writing, on creative writing, we would have 20 students or 20 people joining from different universities. And sometimes I would invite people who I know can write. And we would usually start by reading samples of poetry, of short stories, and talk about them, discuss them, and take it from there. And instead of being on the recipient part where we just receive literature, we had to produce literature because that is what we intended to do from the first place. The other thing is that I decided to take this thing to my own classes at university, at the Islamic University where I teach. I started assigning my students to write fiction rather than research papers. And I usually had students coming to me and complaining that they have never written anything before, let alone write fiction. But again, with the discussions we would have in the class, with the samples and the training sessions we would hold, basically everybody started writing. Even the first story in Gaza Writes Back, called L for Life by Hanan Habashi. In my opinion, it's the best story in the book. And Hanan Habashi came to me the beginning of the term and said she hasn't written anything before. And it's not easy for her to write. And I said, you have to start believing in yourself. As a Palestinian, you have the talent, you have the experience, you live the pain. All you need to do is just to put your pen on the paper, and then words and ideas are going to flow naturally.
And that entire interview is so beautiful, and it's just kind of a miracle that that I was able to spend time with all of you, including Rafat, so long ago, and that we were able to sit down and really talk about this book and how, and then in subsequent interviews over the years, I mean, Rafat would talk about Gaza Writes Back as this really fundamental project, not just in the beautiful stories and essays and how it was put together, but as a way to honor, a dignified Palestinian life in Gaza. People's stories, people's experiences and traditions and imaginations and creativity and art, as really a living document, that would not just hold up over time, of course, but inspire generations and generations of other writers in Palestine and around the world. Yeah, what do you think of when you hear those words from Refaat, Yousef?
My body shakes because this voice means a lot of things to me. It means life. It means courage. And Rifat said that he wanted his students to write because this is an act of courage. I think it takes much courage to gather yourself, especially in Gaza, and start writing. And not just start writing, but to start writing creatively, as Rifat wanted us to do. And again, he highlighted fiction versus non-fiction because he believed in the universal nature of fiction. He said it could be read 100 years from now. It could be read from anybody across the globe. And he wanted to globalize Palestine. He always said that in order to have the physical Palestine, we have to create Palestine in our writings and in our imagination. And that's why he invested in storytelling, short story writing, creative writing. And he would always mention the story that someone in the audience, when he spoke about Gaza Writes Back, I believe it was in Atlanta, Georgia, he said that we have to save Palestine in films, in novels, because Palestine is missing there. And Rifat felt very empowered by these words that Gaza Writes Back serves as a very powerful tool and weapon to materialize Palestine in fiction and to make it global. And he always encouraged people to work on like film projects, documentaries, books, because he believed that creating this space or this Palestine in this space, in the virtual space, and our imagination is as important as having and realizing an independent Palestine. So I always believe that the power of words, we say words are stronger than weapons and swords. And Rifat always wrote in, like, for people who got copies of Gaza Writes Back, that Palestine is a story away. And this is how Rifat saw Palestine. So all we need to do is to tell these stories. And he said, it's selfish. If you know a story, it's selfish not to tell this story.
I have to laugh, and I mean, honestly, as a publisher, I had never published fiction before. I was like very focused on nonfiction writing. And when we started the discussion about Gaza Writes Back, and of course the term is a reference to the Empire Writes Back, which is a global anti-colonial sort of intellectual project. I was saying, well, I think it should be nonfiction, because that's what I knew. And he said, no, it's got to be fiction. And he was completely right for the reasons that Yousef said. So I learned that. That's one of the many things that I learned from Refaat. And there's like a reference. Somebody said something about the power of the imagination. And, the stories in this book are so richly imagined, including Rawan Yaghi's stories that are told in the voice of a Palestinian child living through Operation Cast Lead of 2008, 2009, which was the first devastating Israeli assault on Gaza of the modern era. I mean, it's just spine chilling how beautifully she was able to reproduce that voice. But also Noor El Borno had a story in there in which she imagines the life of an Israeli soldier who has been traumatized by his experiences running the occupation and assaulting Palestinians. Now we know, in a sort of intellectual way, that some Israeli soldiers are indeed traumatized, and there have been, suicides and things like that amongst Israeli soldiers for what they have been doing running the occupation and the military assaults associated with it. But for a Palestinian writer in Gaza to be able to make that leap of imagination into that soldier's bedroom, how powerful is that? So anyway, those are just two of my thoughts about the content of this book. Of course, as Ali said, the introduction, the editor's introduction that Refaat himself wrote was very, very important. And then a couple of actually very final notes. One is that, as Yousef told me, a copy of Gaza Writes Back was always Refaat's favorite book because it represented his commitment to his students and mentees. Yeah. When his body and that of his other family members were discovered, nobody knows much about any of this, like what state the bodies were in, or anyway, there was a copy of Gaza Writes Back in the room with him that he had taken to that place as he fled from place to place. And then obviously, as with the other book, If I Must Die, this wonderful book that Yousef has helped put together, we are hoping that we can generate serious royalties for Refaat's survivors and family. So there you go. Go to our website, justworldbooks.com, or, look for the ISBN, ask your local bookstore, your local library, just buy as many copies as you can.
Well, I'll also mention that Yousef has a wonderful short story in this book, very powerful short story in the book, Gaza Writes Back, the Memorial Edition. And of course, Refaat has his own fiction stories in Gaza Writes Back too. So we get to see several sides of Refaat in that. And of course, the book on the right, If I Must Die. These are two fantastic books. And I think I'm allowed to say, if I'm not giving too much away, that we will have some copies next week in our question and answer show that we're going to give away. I think we'll do that by some sort. We haven't figured that out yet, but we'll have some sort of like draw or something like that. But we want to excite people about that. And I see people in the comments saying, go out and buy both books. Yes, what a wonderful idea. And it's the time of year when people are giving gifts, and there's no better gift than these fantastic books. And so congratulations, Yousef and Helena, on your tremendous work with both of these books. That's the address, justworldbooks.com, where for Gaza Writes Back, the Memorial Edition, and If I Must Die can be found at orbooks.com. And of course, you can request them at your local independent bookshop. People are also saying, ask your public library to order them. Those are fantastic ideas too. Those are all the ways to get it. So, Helena, you're going to come back a little later in the show to talk about some of the momentous events in the world. But for now, Helena and Yousef, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you both again very soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you both.